After studying this module, you shall be able to know how shoe prints are useful in forensic investigation, the various types of shoe prints and about the principles of footwear examination, and how the shoe prints can be analyzed and the various methods of recording the footwear impressions. Footwear or shoe print evidence is considered as the best type of evidence for linking a suspect or a victim to the crime scene. These shoe print evidences are also referred to as the pattern evidences, as these form an exclusive pattern. Shoes and boots have prints and impressions very specific to their particular brand, style and size. Footwear evidence can be found at many crime scenes including breaking and entering, assault, hit and run, armed robbery, rape and homicide. For instance, shoe prints may be found on the tile in the entryway of a residential break-in also. At some point in time, the perpetrator arrived at the crime scene or the scene, committed the crime and then left the scene on foot or in a vehicle. This type of evidence can provide valuable information to investigators, including where the crime scene occurred, the number of parties or vehicles present, the direction of a person may have travelled before, during or after the commission of crime, whether a person was on foot, other crime scenes connected to a perpetrator. This evidence can then be used to help so as to determine if a suspect was present at a crime scene or exclude a person of interest from the investigation. Now let us study first about the types of prints. Footwear can be deposited almost any surface from paper to the human body. Prints hence can thereby be divided into three types or three categories. Starting with the first, we have visible, then plastic, and the third one is the latent prints. A visible print is a transfer of material from the shoe to the surface, and hence this type is clearly visible by the naked eyes and where no additional techniques are required for visualization. An example of this type is the bloody shoe print left on the floors. Next is the plastic print. A plastic print can be defined as the 3D impression left on the soft surface. For example, the shoe prints left on snow, mud or sand, because these surfaces are soft and the imprints on the shoes gets engraved onto these soft surfaces. A latent print is one that is not readily visible to the naked eye. This is the third type of print. This type is created through the static charges between the sole and the surface. The crime scene investigators use powders, chemical reagents or the alternate light sources so as to detect and visualize these prints. For example, the footwear impressions found on tiles or flooring, metal counters, etc. Principles of footwear examination. The basic theory behind footwear analysis is that, much like fingerprints, shoes may leave behind either prints referred to as the imprints or the impressions that can be examined by the investigator also. The type of evidence left behind depends largely on the type of surfaces that has been travelled for. For example, a shoe will leave an impression in loose sand, but on a hard surface like concrete or linoleum, it will leave an imprint. The footwear impressions can be compared with the suspect's footwear so as to determine whether the impressions obtained are from the same individual or not. As shoes are used, their physical features change over time. This is called as wear and is often reflected in the imprint or the pattern left behind. During the examination of a crime scene or other location, if the footwear evidence is found and collected, examiners can compare these unknown impressions to the known impressions connected to other crimes or the other crime scenes, and impressions evidence stored in the law enforcement databases. To this, the examiners use three main characteristics so as to analyze the imprints and the impression. The first one is the class characteristic, next is the individual characteristic, and the third one is the wear characteristic. So now we will take individually one by one. Starting with the first, we have the class characteristics. The class characteristics result from the manufacturing process and are divided into general and limited. The general class characteristics include those that are standard for every item of that make and model. Limited class characteristics refer to the variations that are very unique to certain models. For example, two shoes of the same brand, model and size will have identical tread design and dimension, but may have slight differences due to imperfections on the models used during the manufacturing process. Next is the individual characteristic. The individual characteristics are very unique to that particular sample, and their aspects of a particular shoe or tire that result from use and not from the manufacturing process. These could be from damage such as a cut, gouge or crack, or a temporary alteration like a stone or twig is stuck in the shoes. The third class is the wear characteristics. The wear characteristics result from the natural erosion of the shoe caused by use. The specific wear characteristics include the wear pattern, the wear condition, the amount or depth of the wear, and where extreme, the damage or the destruction of the tread. For instance, the location and amount of tread loss on a particular brand and style of shoe will be different for each person wearing the shoe based on how and where they walk and the length of time they have owned the shoe. Next, we will study about the analysis of shoe prints. Two types of markings are present on the shoes, that is primary and secondary. The primary markings give the information about the maker of shoe or its sole, while the secondary markings are due to the wear and tear of the sole associated with the use. If there is any incidental finding, it will be useful because of its uniqueness, and it will be desirable to find its corresponding shoe before that feature gets lost with time or the damage. The information from shoes can be obtained in three different ways, that is the outer impression, the inner impression, and the other evidence from the shoes. Starting with the first, we have the outer impressions. What are outer impressions? They are the impressions left on an object that was caused by the contact with the footwear. They can be found on the floor, doormats, carpet, doors, or even the body of victim, example due to kicking. Sometimes latent impressions are also encountered, and they are usually difficult to see with the naked eye. When properly collected and preserved, these shoe prints can provide the type, make, description, approximate size, number of suspects, path through and away from the crime scene, the involvement of evidence, and the events that occurred during the crime. Consequently, the importance of shoe impression evidence should not be underestimated. Their detection may require the use of additional specialized light sources such as the portable ultraviolet lighting. Recovery typically includes photography as well as the lifting of the footprints or the shoe prints with gel or electrostatic dust lifters. Next type of impression is the inner impression or the imprints. They are the imprints left in the inside of the shoe by contact from the person's foot. Analysis of the insole impression can then be used to link a person to a particular piece of footwear. And third category is the other evidences from the shoes. It is in the form of body hair, body fluids, skin tags, dust particles, glass fragments that may be found on the shoes. The study of this trace evidence could be used to link the footwear to a location or owner. DNA can be one of the contributing factors in forensic science from the shoes. This knowledge helps a podiatrist to address certain questions, like if a particular person is the usual wearer of a certain shoe, whether certain shoes have the same usual wearer, whether there have been multiple wearers of particular shoes, whether a foot could be fitted in a particular shoe with a shorter marked size than that of the foot, and whether differences between the prints, impressions or the wear marks between shoes or between feet and shoes can be justified in terms of common ownership or not. It is extremely unlikely to have a subject all of whose individual measures coincide with the corresponding population mean in all dimensions. With sufficient available data, a podiatrist may be able to help in identification in a fairly large number of cases. Now we will study about the methods of recording of footwear impressions. There are 4 basic methods of recording the footwear impressions at any crime scene. First is the photography, then documentation or sketching, next is casting, and then is lifting. Now, first is how to take the crime scene photographs or the crime scene photography. Shoe print evidence can be easily located in and outside the scene of crime, keeping in mind that the suspect who arrives at the scene of crime will depart also. The location containing the footwear impression should be photographed accordingly, wherein each and every minute detail should be photographed. While photographing the crime scene, close-up shots, medium range and overall shot should be done because these photographs will help in future for the comparison purposes. An easy way to do this is to place a numbered marker next to the evidence print and the photograph. Also, the main point that should be taken into consideration is that the photographs of the scene of crime should be taken before documentation is carried out, and in order for a footwear examiner to perform a quality examination, high quality close-up photographs are required. Properly photographing impressions is crucial since there is only a slight difference between the different shoe sizes, and if the photographs are not taken at a 90-degree angle to that impression, then the true size cannot be produced in order to compare to the actual shoe size. In the case of impression evidence, general photographs of the evidence location in relation to the rest of the scene are taken, along with the high resolution images of the individual imprints or the impressions. Examiners may also use alternate light sources or the chemical enhancers so as to capture as much detail as possible, especially with the latent imprints. In tracking, which is the process of following the footprints of an individual, photograph the scene as you found it and then place numbers next to each impression. Photograph the scene showing the impression numbers, and this way you can come back later and relate where each impression was found. Then the quality examination photographs can be taken. Next is documentation or sketching. In order to maintain the integrity of the shoe print evidence, the prints obtained from the crime scene or the scene of crime must be properly documented, collected and preserved. A point to be noted is that these impression evidences can be easily damaged, so care must be taken so as to avoid damage to the evidence, otherwise which will result in the ultimate loss of its evidentiary value. This includes securing and documenting the scene prior to collecting any evidence. In the case of impression evidence, general photographs of the evidence location in relation to the rest of the scene are taken, and along with the high resolution images of the individual imprints or the impressions. Examiners may also use the alternate light sources or the chemical enhancers so as to capture as much detail as possible, and especially with the latent prints. Properly photographing impressions is crucial. The crime scene investigators employ various techniques for the collection of footwear and evidence depending on the type of impressions found at the scene of crime. For the impressions found in snow, soil or other soft surfaces, the very commonly employed method for the collection of these imprint evidences is the casting technique. For imprints, the examiners generally try to collect the entire object containing the imprint, such as a whole sheet of paper or cardboard with a shoe print. In certain circumstances, the collection of whole of the evidence is not possible, such as in cases where the print is found on a bank counter. The examiner would use a lifting technique to transfer the imprint to a medium that can be then sent to the laboratory. Next is the casting technique. Irrespective of the fact that the impressions obtained from the footwear have been found indoors or outdoors, they must be photographed properly, documented, casted and lifted. All of the three-dimensional impressions should be cast with the help of dental stone. Dental stone, like plaster of Paris, is a gypsum product, but dental stone, unlike soft plasters, set much harder and have a higher compressive strength and provide a quicker and easier way to recover the impressions. Dental stones having a compressive strength of around 8,000 pounds per square inch or greater are sufficiently harder to be cleaner without loss of detail. Although the dental stone should be mixed in a bucket, it has become more popular to prepare and have on hand the several Ziploc bags of dental stone in 2-pound portions. The proper amount of water for the 2-pound portion can then be added to the bag at the scene of crime, and a dental stone having a consistency of 30 and a compressive strength of 8,000 pounds per square inch requires approximately 9.5 ounces of water. The exact amount of water will depend on the powder to water ratio. The casting material can be carefully poured next onto the impression and then allowed to flow quickly into the impression. The dental stone material will harden in approximately 20 minutes, after which it can again be lifted and placed where it can dry further. Impressions in snow can also be cast with special methods and materials such as the snow print wax. Next in line is the lifting technique. For the lifting purposes, contact or adhesive paper can be placed over the impression present in dust or very light dirt. This allows the dust or dirt to get transferred to the contact paper or adhesive paper, that is the adhesive side of the paper. Once this procedure is complete, it is then peeled off and photographed for future purpose or future reference. This sheet can then also be treated with a mixture of 0.05 grams of crystal violet and 500 ml of distilled water, so that the obtained impression gets stained and hence produces a reversed image on collection. Once this is complete, a piece of clear acetate is placed over the print in order to preserve it for impounding and later examination purposes. The latent fingerprint powders and lifting tapes can be used on various surfaces for contrast and recovery also. In lifting technique, we have different procedures or techniques or instruments. So first we have the gelatin lifter. It is a sheet of rubber with a low adhesive gelatin layer on one side that can lift prints from almost any surface, including the porous, rough, curved and textured surfaces. It is less tacky and more flexible than an adhesive lifter, allowing it to pick up a dusty shoe print on a cardboard box, for example, but not tear the surface of the box. Next is electrostatic dust print lifting device. It is a tool that electrostatically charges the particles within dust or light soil, which are then attracted and bonded to a lifting film. Generally, it is a black or a transparent film. This method is best for collecting dry or dusty residue impressions on almost any surface, even the skin of a cadaver. The imprints and impressions may be further processed to enhance or bring out the additional minutiae details or the minute details. For example, a digital enhancement program such as the Adobe Photoshop can be used to improve the quality of a photographed impression. Fingerprint powders and chemical stains or dyes can enhance the image color or increase the contrast against its specific background also. This enables the lifted or casted evidence to be photographed or scanned well. Now students, let us summarize this module. Footwear or shoe print evidence is considered as the best type of evidence for linking a suspect or a victim to a particular scene of crime. This evidence can then be used to determine or help if a suspect was present at a crime scene or exclude a person of interest from the investigation. Footwear can be deposited on almost any surface from paper to the human body. Prints are divided into three types, that is visible, plastic and the latent prints. The basic theory behind footwear analysis is that much like fingerprints impression, the shoes may leave behind either prints, that is referred to as the imprints or impressions, that can thus be examined by the investigators. Three main characteristics are used to analyze the imprints and impressions, that is class, individual or the wear characteristics. There are four basic methods of recording footwear impressions at the crime scene, that is photography, then is documentation or sketching, next is casting, and the last one is lifting.